Okay, so we'll call the meeting of the Zoning Board of Appeals to order for January the 12th, 2016. We're meeting tonight at the School Administration Building, 566 Main Street in North Andover. If you would all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next on our agenda would be the acceptance of the minutes from the November 10th, 2015 meeting. We did not, let the record reflect, we did not meet in December because one of the petition that was on for then was looking to be continued to today's date, so we did not hold that meeting. So this would be the only agenda minutes that we have.
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes as written for November 10th, 2015.
I'll second the motion.
There's a motion and there is a second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
I will declare the minutes accepted. Okay, so I think maybe what might make sense, we have a couple other matters on our agenda tonight, but the one hearing that we do have, the public hearing, is number 5, the request for hearing of fees that had been continued that I just mentioned. So by Sharon Law Offices, Inc., and they're here. So maybe we'll just go out of order and do that public hearing, and then we can go back to our miscellaneous administrative matters under Section 4.
Al, did you want to do committee reports for, because I actually just have a question.
Oh, yeah, number 3? Yeah, okay, so we'll do that, sure. Number 3.
There's nothing to report with the housing partnership, and I wasn't quite sure if it was still, I think I've asked a couple times if the partnership is still in effect, so I don't know how to go about seeing if that board is still meeting, running, or what.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess we can make another inquiry, maybe through the zoning office. We can ask if there's still a housing partnership committee, and if it's still meeting, and if they're not meeting, and it's de facto, maybe we can just take it off our agenda, or...
And if they're meeting, how come I'm not invited?
How come Ellen?
Well, we know why. We know why, but I'd appreciate it.
So, yeah, maybe we just try to figure out who's still running that and what they're doing. We'll put that on for a report for our next meeting. Okay, so that was number 3. So then we'll just skip down to number 5, if you want. Now, just procedurally, before we get started, there was, I'm sorry, your name? Frank. Attorney Shannon, right?
Sure.
Okay. So you had an initial application that you filed with us, right, that wasn't heard?
Correct.
That got continued from the November date?
At my request.
At your request, because you were having surgery, so you asked to have that continued, and then you filed another application. You filed another petition with us with more forms, so it's effectively 2 petitions?
Just one petition.
It's just one petition?
The original was continued.
Just condensed into one?
Correct.
With the legal advertisement. So the first one didn't have the legal advertisement?
Correct.
Then the second one does?
Yes.
So procedurally, my thought is, when we read the public hearing, we'll just hear that all under that same umbrella of that public hearing.
Sure.
Okay. And then before we get started, I noticed it's a petition about fees, plumbing fees. Now, I did not sit on the Berry Street project, so I am happy to not participate in this hearing. If you would like me not to participate, I had recused from the Berry Street hearing, but this has nothing to do with that. This is just plumbing
I
fees.
have no objection to your participation.
I also hold an electrician's license. I'm a licensed journeyman electrician. I'd just like to disclose that for the record. I don't
I
think...
actually have a refrigerator in my house, and I just want to disclose that for the record. Al?
Yeah.
No objection
Well,
whatsoever.
You know, I'm just putting it on the record because, you know, I just want you to know that I have a license that's engaged in the trades. I don't actively use it, but I happen to have the license, and because it's related to plumbing fees, I figured the disclosure would be appropriate.
Understood.
So,
Mr. Manzi, excuse me, could I address Mr. Shannon for 1 second, please?
sure.
Mr. Shannon,
Yes, sir.
I happen to be a master plumber, okay? And I've done plumbing for many years. And Mr. Hurley and I, at one time, belonged to the same plumbers union, okay? I also am remodeling a house here in North Andover. Well, I will be obtaining a plumbing permit that I will be taking out on. I own the house. If you would like me to disqualify myself, I fully understand. The decision is up to you, sir.
Absolutely not.
Okay, thank you. I just
Okay.
wanted to be
Appreciate it.
fully upfront about whatever, that's all.
So, procedurally, the way we work is we are a 5-person board. There's five regular members who are right here, okay, and 3 alternates. So, to the extent these types, my understanding that these types of matters require a supermajority vote to be approved. They would require 4 votes for approval. Just so you know how we're comprised, if the matter gets continued and there's an alternate that needs to come in at some point. Right now, we're fully comprised tonight as it relates to the evidentiary piece of your hearing.
To be clear, Mr. Chair, it's 4 out of 5, or not 4 out of 7?
It's 4 out of 5. So the alternates, while present, they're not voting. They would only stand in if one of the regular members doesn't vote. And I suppose, you know, I usually delegate in terms of seniority who was the most recent alternate to come in and redo a rotation. So I guess that would be, I can do that in advance now, right? That would be you, Denny, right? Okay.
Understood.
So that all sound okay?
The alternates are free to participate, I assume, and ask questions.
Typically, we do. You know, I mean, I don't. The way I run it is fairly loose. You know, I mean, everyone's welcome to ask questions. We do it through the chair. But in the context of voting, I just want you to know, as it relates to the voting, that's how it goes.
Understood. Thank you.
And with that being said, we don't have any other procedural matters. We can read the public hearing notice. We have a public hearing notice. We'll open the public hearing. Is this it? Oh, thank you. All right.
I'm happy to read it if it pleases the chair.
Yeah, it pleases the chair, thanks.
The Town of North Andover, Zoning Board of Appeals, notice is hereby given that the Board of Appeals will hold a public hearing at the Town Hall at 120 Main Street, North Andover, Massachusetts, on Tuesday, January 12, 2016, at 7:30 p.m. to all parties interested in the petition of Shannon Law Associates on behalf of National Refrigeration, Inc., for property located at 16 Berry Street, map 106.d, parcels 0032, North Andover, Massachusetts, 01845, in the R3 zoning district. The petitioner is hereby requesting a finding to appeal the determination made by Mr. Brown and the reasonableness of the plumbing permit fees assessed by the building department to compensate the town of North Andover for its anticipated regulatory expense, pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 40, Section 22F, and Mass General Laws, Chapter 143, Section 100. Application and supporting materials are available for review at the office of the zoning department located at 1600 Osgood Street, North Andover, Mass, Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday from the hours of, yeah, everybody knows that part, by order of the Board of Appeals, Albert P. Manzi III, Esquire, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. So the public hearing's open, and then the last piece I'll tell you is we did ask for an opinion from town council. We don't, I think in my 10 years or so doing this, I can't remember an application coming in quite like this. I wasn't really sure where the authority of the board lied, to be very honest, because we don't necessarily we're not the final fee setter, or maybe not even the fee setter in town. So there is some information that did come back to the board that you can certainly, that would be part of the record, that, you know, you have an opportunity to look at if you need to look at it. But the floor is yours, sir. You're welcome to
Okay.
present.
Is there any question about the board's ability to hear this matter?
Well, as to the substantive issues,
Yeah, I mean, from a background point of view, there's a case called KNOTT versus the town of Lethbridge, which was issued in 2005. And that decision basically said that the Board of Building Regulation and Standards, pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 143, Section 100, has the ability to hear appeals unless the town has some form of forum by which an appeal such as this can be heard. The Knott decision went on to outline that actual procedure and actually defined the Zoning Board of Appeals as the appropriate venue. So we are here pursuant to the Knott decision, which was reinforced in 2009 by the Silva decision.
so you think that's where the authority vests with the board in terms of this matter?
Absolutely.
Because I don't, you know, I didn't see it under Section 40A, which is generally 40A, B, R, you know, those are the
Right.
types of things that
Right.
tend to come our way typically. So if that's, I mean,
It's definitely a unique situation.
Sure.
There's only been 2 or 3 cases in Massachusetts, in the history of Massachusetts, that focus on fees. Only one case is building fees, which was an appeal, and that's the second case. And the third case has to do with burial fees. So it's pretty clear to me in our research that this is the appropriate venue, and then if there is an appeal by either the building inspector or our side, it would be to the Superior Court, perhaps the District Court, due to some recent rule changes.
as it relates to a decision that this board would issue.
Yes.
I mean, I'm not 100% sold on the substantive authority. I'm going to take what you're purporting, you know, to be your position.
Understood.
You know, we are sort of relying a little bit on counsel in terms of this because like I said, I don't really have a lot of familiarity with the topic. I mean, procedurally, I mean, I do think there's a threshold procedural issue as it relates to the date and the time it was filed and whether or not it was, you know, stamped at the clerk's office. I think there may be a threshold issue as far as that goes. But certainly give you the opportunity to present, let anybody, you know, ask you any questions they may have, and then the board will decide whether, you know, what the next step would be if they are prepared to, when you're prepared to close your evidence, we can move to close the public hearing, and then the board can decide whether or not they want to dispose of it tonight, if they want to move it back to town council for any additional input based on what you may present or offer into evidence, and we'll just sort of see how that tracks. Maybe it would need to be continued, see what how your presentation goes. So
Okay.
I feel like I'm doing all the talking. I don't want to be the talk. It's your time. So
All right.
you know.
Well, the genesis of this issue is that North Andover Holdings LLC is developing a property down on Berry Farm. They contracted with a general contractor named Pilot Construction. That contract is $38.7 million. Several subcontractors then contracted with Pilot Construction, one of which is National Refrigeration. We have plumbing and a little bit of gas work. Our contract is $2.1 million. When we went to apply for the building permit, the building inspector calculated the fee based upon the $38 million total construction price. Okay? We don't think that's accurate. Our position is that the plumbing permit fee should be calculated based upon either the value of the plumbing subcontract or the number of fixtures to be installed at the site. And we've done some calculations, which I'll get to. There's no dispute that the town has the authority to assert and levy regulatory fees. We don't dispute that at all. The only question that we have is the statute and the case law says that the fee has to be reasonable and proportionate. It's a two-part test. So the first part of the test is reasonable. Is the fee adequately compensating the town and the town's officials for the work they're going to do to oversee this particular plumber and the work that he does? And is it correlated to those costs and expenses? As I sit here today, I can't tell you yes or no because I don't know what those costs or expenses are. The second part of the test is whether or not it's proportionate. This is my problem. Your plumbing inspector is assessing the same fee to all of the subcontractors. He charged the same $58,000 to my national refrigeration contractor, and he charged the same amount to the electrical subcontractor, $58,000. But we both have two different contract prices. We're at $2.1 million, he's at $2.5 million. So it's not proportionate. It can only be proportionate based upon the value of the contract or per your fee schedule, the number of fixtures that that party installs. To make a uniform and unilateral fee across the board based upon an overall construction price is not proportionate. We're not doing $38 million worth of work. We're only doing $2.1 million worth of work. So that fee that you're charging is not in proportion to the value of the work that we're providing on the project. So the cases have said, you know, one, you've got to prove that it's reasonable, and that's really not an issue for today. I'm not going to contest, you know, how you calculate the reasonableness of the fee. What I'm contesting is that it has to be proportionate to the value of the work. And your plumbing inspector interprets the cost of construction in your fee schedule to be the cost of construction of the overall project. And I just think that's incorrect. You're one of a very few number of towns that actually do it that way. The majority of towns in the Commonwealth calculate it based upon the value of that subcontractor's subcontract. They don't calculate it on the overall construction cost.
Can I just ask a quick question? So this is how he calculates it over the town or just for your project?
I only know about our project. I was going to do a public records request and ask him for the last 100 plumbing permits, but I felt I might get lynched, so I didn't do that.
Well, I was interpreting how you're classifying the town as doing it, you're just specific to your project.
Yes, to my project.
Not how our town
Correct.
calculates fees.
Correct.
Just how the town calculated fees on your project.
Correct.
Okay.
So I actually did our own calculations. May I approach?
Sure.
And there's basically two manners by which you can calculate the fees.
Is this something that you already filed with your package,
No.
or is this a new exhibit?
It's a new exhibit.
Okay.
Thank you.
You know what, so what I'm going to do, can I just have another?
Absolutely.
And then
It is, however, a
I'll just send this
summary
to-
of what is in the package.
You know, I just want to give this for our file. Oh, yeah, why don't you give, that would be great.
So the town's fee schedule for plumbing permits gives you a 1/10 of 1.5% of the estimated cost of construction or the minimum fee. So my top calculation is the estimated construction cost. And then the minimum fee is based upon, depending upon the type of project, you have a per fixture fee. And what I did was calculate the number of fixtures, multiply it by your per fixture fee in your fee schedule, and come out with the $14,000. So from our perspective, the correct proportion of this fee is either the $3,200 or the $14,000 based on your fee schedule. But the key issue here is
And what was the amount that was paid?
$58,000.
$58,000.
And in the package that we submitted, we have, it's Mr. Brown's email, and he shows how he walks through his calculations, and he lists the fees collected. And the fees collected from both my client, National, and the electrician are the exact same, but they both have two separate subcontract amounts. So I don't think you meet the proportionate test that the case law requires.
All right.
So I want you to find that based upon the plumbing permit fee schedule, the construction cost is actually the cost of the subcontractor's subcontract, and the plumbing inspector should calculate the fee either based upon the fixture number or the percentage.
Can I interrupt?
Yeah, just before you do, I just wanted to make sure, so with this exhibit and this application, the revised application that you submitted, we are supposed to have exhibits 1, 2, 3, 1, B, C, D, E, F, and G, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right, plus the new one. Okay, sure, go ahead.
Mr.
Shannon.
Shannon, I'm sorry.
All right.
Okay. My question is this, and I totally understand the difference in monies here, it's quite substantial. Okay. My question is, why wasn't this brought up to the Board of Selectmen and/or the town manager? Wouldn't they be the appropriate person to rule, parties, boards, whatever, to rule on this instead of the zoning board?
Unfortunately, the Commonwealth statutes are not a model of clarity in many areas. That's why we have lawyers. In this particular case, this statute, Chapter 143, Section 100, basically says it's the State Board of Appeals unless the town has an appeal vehicle, and you do have a vehicle.
Being this board?
Yes.
An appeal vehicle with respect to fees in and of themselves?
Yes. Anything related to the Board of Building Regulations and Standards falls to you.
Have you tried going to the Board of Selectmen and to the town manager, or you just feel this is the appropriate place for it to happen?
I believe this is the appropriate place for this to happen. I mean, I've got a...
Start somewhere.
Lawyers live and die on the previous case law. So I've got a case that tells me in 4 sentences the exact procedure I've got to follow. So that's really what I'm following.
And is the not case that you're referencing, is that in here?
It's referred to, it may not be in there.
Exhibit B.
It's in there.
It's what?
Exhibit B.
Is it a big?
Yes.
All right.
And if you go to page 4 of Exhibit B, you see the small 4 at the top?
Where it's highlighted? Yep.
Yeah, there's there's 2 columns on that page. On the right-hand column, in the second line at the end, it starts neither not. If you were to read from there to the end of that paragraph, it defines the procedure that we're following.
Starting where, Counselor, on the second column?
At Exhibit B,
Yep.
page 4 at the
Yep.
top, there's 2 columns. A
Yep.
column on the right,
Yep.
at the second line, at the end of it, it starts neither not, K-N-O-T, and if you read to the end of that paragraph,
What are you suggesting that passage is saying?
If you read this case in its entirety, Mr. Knott's action was sent or dismissed. And one of the underlying reasons was that he didn't take his first step was to go to district court. What this is saying is that your first step is to go to the Zoning Board of Appeals. And then, if either party, your plumbing department or National, has an appeal, they then take it to a court.
Perhaps that's what I'm asking, is what I'm trying to do, Counselor, is to make sure that we are in the right place, which is kind of what the topic that we're on now. What I'm struggling with is, where does this say, and it's probably never as clear as I want it to be, where does it say North Andover Zoning Appeals is the place to appeal a North Andover building permit fee?
It won't exactly say.
I appreciate that.
Okay. If you follow down from the top.
Yep.
5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. The 11th line down. After the italics, it starts, "We note only."
Yep.
It says,
If it could have been appealed to a local zoning board of appeals.
Correct.
So it could have been appealed.
Correct.
Let's back it up and say, so you're suggesting that it could have been appealed to this zoning board of appeals? Totally
Yep.
get it.
yes.
Where does it say that we're the right body for this, though?
If you look at Mass General Law, Chapter 143, Section 100, which I'm sure you don't have.
No, I think you gave it to us.
Okay.
A. Exhibit A.
Okay. At the very end, the last full paragraph, the first two sentences, refers to a local board of appeals in a city or town or a regional board of appeal.
So, and I think we're pointing to us in the second line, the local agency charged with the administration or enforcement of the state building code?
I'm not sure where you are on that one.
There's, whomever prepared the package offered a highlighted section,
Yep.
which is the second complete paragraph of Section 100. So I'm looking at Section 100.
Yeah.
I believe. There's a highlighted section.
Correct.
Which is the second paragraph.
Yeah.
Second line, 6 words in, or local agency charged with.
Correct.
And so this is the language that we are looking to say that the North Andover Zoning Board of Appeals, we interpret it.
Yes.
The North Andover Zoning Board of Appeals is the local agency charged with the code enforcement.
Correct. That paragraph, in conjunction with the last paragraph on the next page.
You've spent a lot of time, Counselor, putting this together, huh?
Yes. These unique things are not cost-effective for the client.
Like what I'm struggling with, I always want to hang my hat on something easy, the engineer's black or white kind of thing.
I'll give you the easy.
We rarely get there to black or white.
When we first got this, we reviewed it. We're torn whether it should be the North Andover Zoning Board of Appeals or the State Board of Appeals for the Board of Building Regulation and Standards. We sent it to you both. The State Board of Appeals came back and said, nope, we're not hearing it. You've got to go to the Zoning Board of Appeals first.
Do you have a letter stating that?
Yes.
That they recommend coming to us?
Yes, absolutely.
Do you have a copy of that letter?
I will find it.
Exhibit C in our packet.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's somewhere in there.
Yeah.
It doesn't actually, it doesn't say go to the North Andover Zoning Board of Appeals. What the state board is saying is, it's not us, it's somebody else.
But it's not specifically naming the local zoning board.
Here.
Correct.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a question?
As soon as we get to public comment.
That'd be great. Specific to this matter, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Mr. Mailer is our esteemed town manager, so, just so you know, but, just finish our inquiry and then move on.
Sure.
So in that paragraph that you were talking about here, the appeals board may require as a condition precedent to the appeal to the appeals board that it said be appealed, first be heard at such local or regional board of appeals. Is that what you were referencing with respect to that letter?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, so what was the date that you first made the inquiry with respect to the building inspector?
Our first date was September 22nd, 2015.
And then the timestamp on this is December 17th. Right?
I won't dispute that.
Okay. And then the timestamp on your first filing?
The first letter is October 26th, 2015.
So, would you agree that the appeal needed to be taken up within 30 days?
Not necessarily, because the permits were in 5 different phases, and the last permit, I think, was October 26, 2015 by National.
But he presented you the whole permit fee schedule. Even though it was in phases, he presented you the whole schedule.
Absolutely. You're correct.
On the 22nd?
On the 22nd, no, it was the 23rd, he sent me an email which had building permit fees, plumbing permit fees, and then the North Andover fee calculation.
All right, so that's the effective date of notice of the fee schedule of his
I thought it was the 18th, and then he explained again how they would calculate it on the 23rd. Jim, we have a timeline here.
You may be correct. I don't remember an earlier email, and that's all I have in my chronology, so.
Any additional, do you have any additional points you'd like to raise, or any additional questions for Attorney Sharon before we get to Mr. Mailer's question?
Where is, just to go back to an earlier point that you made, Counselor, where is it written that the word used was proportionate?
Correct.
Where's that written?
In the 2009 Silva case, it's Paul Silva versus the City of Attleboro. The court states, although a municipality has no independent power of taxation, it may assess, levy, and collect fees when the legislature has authorized it to do so, provided that those fees are reasonable and proportional. And that is the lead case right now on fees.
Okay, and so what you would say is that there's kind of a direct proportion. If the electrical sub is one number and the plumbing sub is another number, then the fee needs to be proportional kind of to those two different numbers, as opposed to an alternative reading of that. I don't think that made it into our packet, which is totally fine. I'm not faulting anybody. But an alternative reading would be that it can't be something that's exorbitant. It's just, instead of using the word not exorbitant, whoever wrote that, the judge used the word proportional. So in other words, you can't charge yourself $1 million for a $2 million job. It's kind of a proportional, an alternative reading of proportional, rather than something as mathematically precise as subs 2.1, subs 2.1, another subs 2.5. You need to be some percentage.
There has to be some correlation as to the fees. And charging, my position is really kind of simple. You can't charge a fee based on $38 million of work when my guy's only doing $2 million. It just doesn't make sense to me.
See, now I see it differently. I see that as 1.5% charged by the town for the total project.
It's
fees.
10% of that 1.5, so it's even smaller than that. You can move the
But
decimal a couple
0.02.
more.
It's actually, your percent is 0.02 of the whole project.
I get 2%.
So in 1.5% total fees by the town, by this $38 million project, and 1.5% of those are fees.
Just to make it more dramatic, Ellen, it's 0.15%. We need to move the decimal over. Because
Right.
it's not 1.5%, it's 10% of 1.5%.
Okay,
Right.
yep.
So just moving the decimal over, so it's
So that
to make it more
58
dramatic, it's just a smaller number is all I'm saying.
That 58,000 is on top of the 485,000 you got from the general contractor in building permit fees.
Correct.
Okay.
And my answer to that is cost of doing business.
Yeah.
Hey,
That's my answer to that, the cost of doing business.
I don't argue that there's costs of doing business. I just think that this fee structure is not reasonable, and it's definitely not proportionate. Two people can agree to disagree. I disagree with you.
Can I ask, not that you would know this, under what criteria was the electrical permit fee charged? Was there a formula that the electrical inspector or the town electrical department, what was the formula that they determined their fee under?
The email from Mr. Brown didn't break out the how we got to it, other than to show that it was the exact same number that the national refrigeration number was.
It's right there.
I mean, I can see if the electrical
Yeah.
permit, as you say, is 2.5 mil, and the plumbing is 2.1 mil, okay? And the town is saying that they're identical fees, obviously there's something wrong there, okay? With the $2.5 million worth of work versus 2.1. But I don't think it drops it to the point of, we'll say, 14,000 versus a 50-odd thousand number. I don't think it should be that dramatic.
And I'm not really in a position to tell you what the right number is. I just did alternate calculations based on your fee schedule.
Yeah. And I would just be curious as to see how the electrician determined that number.
But they're not here before us, and
I
they're not
understand.
disputing it, so.
Yeah, right. And only because there's no dispute with that, okay?
Well, you
I don't
break
think
that
that they
down.
found anything offensive with that.
The only matter before us is...
He didn't want to pay me.
It was after Christmas, huh?
No, I had conversations with someone at the electrician's office, one or two conversations.
But nothing submitted evidentiary.
Absolutely
The only
not.
matter before us
It's
is
just national refrigeration.
just national refrigeration, okay.
You know, once again, I find it hard that this matter is even in front of us, that it's not in front of the selectmen and/or Mr. Mailer behind you. That should be in negotiations between the Board of Selectmen, or even well, there's no building committee, buildings, you know what I'm trying to say, but why the zoning board? It seems like the zoning board is becoming the supreme justice of the town of North Andover. I mean, we're being asked to rule on sewer pumps, right? Okay, we're being asked to rule on solar panels. Okay, well, now we're being asked to rule on something, what am I trying to think of?
It's been an
Permits for.
interesting couple of months,
Yeah,
there's no doubt
It
about
sounds it.
I mean, it sounds like we're the Supreme Court of North Andover.
Well, the reality, Alan, is that we are the Supreme Court in North Andover when it comes to zoning and code enforcement issues. So unfortunately...
But is this a zoning or code enforcement issue?
It's
Well,
a
his
code issue,
position,
for sure.
his position is that it is. His position is because of the letter that came from, what was that regulatory group?
Board of Building Regulations and Standards, State Board of Appeals.
So that they punted or defaulted back to us, and he's relying on that letter in these findings.
I
in the
understand.
North-
I understand.
But there's no, so it's ambiguous for us in that there's no
There's no...
codified statute saying this is what you hear. It's sort of pieced together, right? Is that what
I think
that's where it's a little
Chapter
hard for us
143,
sometimes.
Section 100 is pretty clear. You know, you
143,
do have a zoning board of appeals, and it points to you guys.
Was that in here?
Yeah.
We were just reading that, right? It was nicely highlighted, as I saw, right? The yellow highlights. So that's, you highlighted two particular paragraphs in here. The second one is whoever is aggrieved by the interpretation. And then the other one we discussed to 4 with the last paragraph.
Correct.
Okay. Well, why don't we get,
Go on,
do you
Dave.
do you have any objections, sir, if we let Mr. Naylor's question be presented?
Absolutely not.
And then, the way I tend to do these public comments is, it's nice tonight, we have this nice small group, so whatever Mr. Naylor raises, when he's done with whatever points he wants to raise. And I'm going to consider him, for the purposes of your hearing, somebody who would likely have standing, because he is the town manager with respect to fees, in terms of the public input. Our public input's not usually general public, anybody, the sort of a priority with respect to, in a typical zoning matter, the statutory abutter comes first, and we see how the time's going. So certainly with respect to a matter like this and the substance, anything Mr. Mailer has to say would be welcomed.
So, Mr. Chairman, Andrew Mailer, Town Manager, Town of North Andover. I'd like to refer to two pieces, because I do think there continues to be a struggle with connecting some dots that don't seem to be clearly connected to Mr. Crucia's point about responsibility. Within the packets provided by Attorney Shannon, the third tab 3, about 2/3 of the way down, refers to a very specific section of Mass General Law, Chapter 143, Section 100. Begins with the sentence, "the applicable statute," and goes on to cite the statute. Then in parentheses it says, "may establish a local board of appeals," and in this case, Board of Appeals is not capitalized. In a city or town or regional board of appeal for more than 2 or more cities and towns consisting of not less than 3 nor more than 5 members. There's nothing about that section of the statute which at all connects it to the zoning board of appeals as we would know it under the applicable statutes under Mass General Law, Chapter 40. So I think that the reference there is being confused. The question is there an appeal body for these kinds of things? I don't think it necessarily connects the dot that the authority in this case is the zoning board of appeal. That's why these cases are so rare. Is there a place where you can appeal the decision of a building inspector relevant to fees, right? That body may default, quite frankly, to the permit-setting authority, which is the Board of Selectmen. I'd also refer to the attachment C, included in the packet, which is the response from the state, which indicates that it didn't have jurisdiction. And in that, if I have it correctly, was it C that had the...
Yes.
Yeah, it might be more than
It
one.
doesn't expressly, again, say where the Board of Appeal is. It simply says they're not the jurisdictional authority. So I think when you combine the two, the state is saying we're not the jurisdictional authority, go back to the town, and the statute is referencing the Board of Appeal, but not referencing making any statutory connection back to this board. And I think that's purposeful. It's saying in lowercase, Board of Appeal. Is there some place to go when you challenge this? And I would probably lean toward Mr. Crucia that there'd be a question of whether or not the fee establishing authority, which is clear in the statute, that's the Board of Selectmen, is the place where you'd ask the question, does this seem appropriate?
Thank you.
Thank you.
But you're the only subdivision of the town that has the name Board of Appeals in it. So you really don't have a choice
The statute
except
says
here.
Board of Appeal, lowercase.
Yeah.
Doesn't reference as it does in the statutory site of the establishment of this body.
Are you asking me to ask Mr. Mailer if there is another Board of Appeal in town?
Sure.
Would you
Yes.
like me to ask
Yes.
that? Because I really don't know. I mean, I know, like, for abatements and so forth, I don't know whether that's considered a Board of Appeal of some kind. Is there another type of appeal body, sir?
I think there are other appeal bodies relative that are connected to specific statutory provisions, not unlike the Board of Appeals has authority under a specific statute as an appeal body. So it could be an abatement on the Board of Assessors as an example. I think in this case, it's the question for me, or the interpretation I'm making, is the towns could establish such a body. Doesn't sound like in my experience that many do, quite frankly, because this is a rare thing.
You're correct.
Challenge a fee. So the boards could
Well, I
establish.
can understand why the towns wouldn't establish it.
Right.
Based
Go to
on-
court.
Based on some, what I've heard, I mean, it's under the, if somebody wants to challenge these fees, they want to get into they want to get into the courts, and they probably need to go to an appeal board first, right? Seems to be what happens. So, maybe something to consider for future, for the policy setters in town. Because this is certainly, I think in the 10 years, and I'm not going to quantify how many years Ellen's been on, but, I don't think we've ever seen anything quite like this. So, it's certainly educational. But, I agree with Mr. Kuchar with respect to the selectmen. They seem to be the fee setting. They set the fees as it relates. It's not like, conservation maybe, where they have a separate statute that handles what they do, is my
Perhaps you may want to consider asking town council as to whether or not you have the authority to decide this issue.
Well, I think that if you wanted to submit a brief to us, or, I hate to use the word brief, but if you wanted to submit something a little bit more, the board may ask town council. They certainly have the discretion with which to do that. They have broad discretion. That's an interesting phrase for tonight's meeting. But as it relates to anything that you want to submit to support your position as to the board's authority, and you wanted to continue the hearing in order to do that, you could ask the board as part of your public hearing process. The board has discretion in terms of whether they want to, have it go another meeting or not go another meeting. You have a pretty complete packet. You've cited your case law, but if you feel as though there's something else you'd like
Well,
to...
it seems to me that there is some question as to who would have the authority to hear this. So, brief is an odd word because lawyers are never brief. So, if you'd like, I would like the opportunity to supplement with a short brief. But I don't think that we would need to have another hearing unless you felt it was appropriate. I'd just submit it. You could take it for what it's worth and then make your decision.
Well, here's the thing. With respect to the public hearing, all right, so we meet monthly, with the exception of July, unless there's a special meeting that needs to be called. For some reason, our meetings get scheduled. So if it relates to something that you would want the board to consider as to the public hearing, and you wanted a continuance in order to do that, I would ask that you would consider signing a time waiver form in order to toll the timing, and so the board then wouldn't have to call a special meeting to come in to hear something within whatever, because otherwise, we'd have to
I'll obviously do that.
close the public hearing, so.
Al, can I just ask the question? We have a memo from town attorney saying that it was not filed within the 30 days.
Well, there are a couple of different things that don't entirely satisfy me about Tom's memo.
Okay.
Because if we utilize the issuance of the most recent permit, which is not an unreasonable argument to make, as the date of which the building inspector's determination of the fee was, and frankly, if I'm going to be intellectually consistent about things, I'm in the middle of a fight somewhere else about kind of the date of when the date starts, and the issuance of the permit is when an appeal period starts to toll. If I'm to remain intellectually consistent. So I'm inclined to suggest that I think it was October 26th was the last permit issued.
Yes.
So that, to me, that would be the date at which we'd start counting, the 30 or 45 days. 30 days under 40A, which is what Tom has given us a memo on, or 45 days according to Section 100 of this state building code stuff. So I feel like there's a timeliness element that's reasonably satisfying to me. I'm not satisfied that this Section 100 that the counselor has advanced here, because I don't see, I agree with the town manager. I'm not finding the dots. I think that if we looked at this quickly, we can absolutely say that the Zoning Board of Appeals is the right board, but the usage in this Section 100 of just the phrase appeals board, someone could say, if they were doing a quick read, say, that's you guys. You're the Zoning Appeals Board. But the language appeals board in this section is referring back to the Building Code Appeals Board at the state level.
Right.
And the paragraph that's highlighted at the end is the appeals board. So the state level appeals board may establish a local board of appeals. Unless the state level board has established us, has pointed to us, the local zoning board of appeals, as its local board of appeals as used in this section, then it's not us. And so I would ask the Councilor Shannon, Attorney Shannon, is there somewhere, has the state level board of appeals anointed a local zoning board of appeals generally, or the North Andover zoning board of appeals, as its local board of appeals for these purposes?
In writing, no.
I think you'd make the argument.
We've had multiple conversations with the Board of Building Regulations and the State Board of Appeals, and it was like pulling teeth just to get them to write a letter saying they weren't going to take, we sent in the initial letters both to North Andover and the SBA at the same time. They called us back and said, look, what is this? We don't hear these. We don't even know what this is. And multiple phone calls back and forth. And I was like, look, you got to tell me that you're not going to hear this. You got to put it in writing. I have nowhere to go. You're telling me you're not going to hear it. I can interpret Chapter 43 as saying that you do hear it. And then, we went back and forth, and she said, you should go to the Zoning Board of Appeals because they're the ones in charge of the permits, the real estate, the zoning, and all that.
My question is this: that the Board of Selectmen determine the fee schedules for the town. Why don't you put yourself on an agenda for a Board of Selectmen's meeting?
I could do that, but, I have this case from 2005 that, in my mind, is very specific about what I have to do. And it calls out the Zoning Board of Appeals.
So Paul, what were you getting at
Time.
in terms of...
I think where I was going, I guess to short circuit the entire thing, which is that I'm not satisfied that we're a Section 100 Building Code Appeals Board. So I'm not satisfied that we're the appropriate path for that. I absolutely lean toward that we are the 40A place for an appeal to come. That we are if you've got a problem with a building inspector, you come to the local zoning board of appeals. That's us, and then we are the Supreme Court at that point. And if we go the 40A path, if the applicant goes the 40A path, then we've got a 30-day appeal period. We've got to submit something within 30 days. And as I said earlier, I'm persuaded that October 26th, we're timely in that regard. So where I end up is, and we're timely in that regard, Ellen. I saw a look there. We're timely in that regard. If we accept the October 23rd letter or 26th letter that the applicant submitted, and I love the rules and everything, but it feels, again, where I lean is, we're on notice. The applicant has filed something. Was it in the right place at the right time and in the right form? Probably not. But I hate making this attribution. But Star Trek: The Next Generation, Jean-Luc Picard once said, "There can be no justice so long as law is absolute." And this is just kind of falling in that. I know, total geekdom out there at home.
That's pretty good.
Paul, was that a brief?
So I spiral all the way to.
Was that a brief?
I spiral all the way to. I'm satisfied enough to get past the procedural stuff because I hate punting on procedural stuff. It feels cheap to me. So I want to get to the substantive nature of the applicant, and the applicant says it's not reasonable, it's not proportional. And even if I get that far, I hate to say this, I'm not necessarily persuaded on either of those counts either. So where I end up is, this is just me, one person at the table here. There are ways to hang this procedurally, which I wouldn't like, but I could do. But even if I do get past the procedural stuff, substantively, I'm not persuaded. So what I don't want to do is to necessarily have the applicant go off and write a brief and do the request for records and all that kind of stuff, spend time and money on something wherein I'm not persuaded by the reasonableness or proportional. Now, there may be more to the argument, Counselor, and I'm happy to be open-minded about that. But sitting here right now, I'm just not persuaded in that direction.
Understood.
So I guess the question is, what are you asking? This is your hearing. What are you asking the board to do?
I'd like you to make a decision based on the information you have.
All right. Yes, sir. Name.
May I speak?
Of course, sure.
I
Name.
was notified as a butter
Okay.
of the hearing.
Name. Okay.
My name's Daniel Leader. I live at 48 Windsor Lane. I'm in a butter to this project, and I also have an interest in the fact that I am also a plumber. And I deal with large commercial projects on a daily basis. And town manager mentioned this being an unusual circumstance. 40 years, I've never seen or heard anything like this. To the point that I called the State Board of Plumbing examiners this morning because I have a personal relation, do a lot of business with them. They informed me that the town, any town, has the authority to set their fees, not regulated by the state. The counselor, the issue here seems to be the plumbing permit. You didn't mention any fees for the gas permit. I haven't heard any discussion about a mechanical permit.
The only fee before us.
I understand that, but can I ask you a question directly?
Well, what's
Is National Refrigeration doing the mechanical also?
No, they're just doing plumbing.
Okay, all right, well, part of the point being is the town may have missed opportunity for fees from that project, from the mechanical contractor, if there's a sprinkler contractor. I understand his concern, but at the same time, your opening remarks was, you stated that the town has the right to set the fees. That's pretty simple.
In a consistent manner.
Reasonable and proportionate, and I'm arguing that it's not proportionate. That's my only argument.
As they say, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right?
Absolutely.
All right, so you want us to make a decision tonight based on what's here?
Yes.
I think that's a good choice.
All right. Is the board inclined to seek any more input from town council based on what's come in? Or any of the substantive arguments prior to closing the hearing? Would the board like to?
Should we close public comment before we get to board deliberations?
Well, I mean, as it relates, I think I wouldn't close the public hearing if you want additional information from town council. I wouldn't close the hearing.
I wasn't suggesting closing the hearing, just closing public comment. Since the applicant has stated his case and said, requested that we make a decision based on the information before us, we've heard comment from Mr. Mailer and from Mr. Windsor. There being no further public comment, perhaps we should close that and then get to the board deliberation.
We could do that. I'm just trying to, as it relates to whatever council may offer us, I don't know if that makes sense to, I don't know if there's a public comment portion of the hearing. It's just a public hearing. And my understanding is it's either open or closed, and then we deliberate. So, and if we vote a decision, then it'll be within 14 days. Did you have?
Mr. Chair, just want to make sure that the town's position at this point is that the interpretation of that section of the statute is not that the zoning board of appeals has the authority about this matter. That may change over time to this written deliberation. At this point, the town's position is this is not the jurisdictional body to take up this matter.
So we have various issues before us. We have we have that issue. We have the procedural issue with respect to the time stamping of the filing, and then we have the other issues that are discussed substantively. So that's why I thought it might make sense to, continue the matter to the next hearing date and seek additional counsel from.
I think when you
Town council.
seek additional counsel, that's costly, more costly to the applicant as well. I don't know what more we're going to get.
That's fine.
So
So,
I mean, I'm satisfied with the amount of information that I have.
if you're
here.
inclined to close the public hearing and he wants it closed, then we'll just close it, if that's what the board votes to do, and then we'll get into deliberations.
That's what I would suggest, Mr. Chair.
All right? You want to put that in the form of a motion?
I make a motion to close the public hearing.
Motion by Mr. Kusia. Is there
I'll
a
second that.
Second by Ms. McIntyre. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, the regular members have voted to close the hearing. On to deliberations.
All right, thank you.
But
You don't want to hear our
you're welcome
deliberation?
to stay. We haven't voted the decision, we just closed the
This
hearing.
is the best part of the show.
My experience with, is that they have it kind of in private and then they issue a written decision, but that's
Oh,
all.
no.
Not the end of it has transparency.
Okay.
We do, after we vote a decision, we do issue it within 14 days. It sounds like we'll probably vote it tonight, right? Is that what I'm hearing?
That's what it feels like to me, Mr.
Okay.
Chair.
Paul, you want to talk?
I would just kick things off by just kind of repeating what I said kind of at the close of the public comment portion, which is that there are ways to hang this thing procedurally. I'm not inclined to do that, since the applicant has given notice, however imperfect it may be. Nonetheless, when we get to the substance of the matter, which is the reasonableness and proportionality of the fee, I'm just not persuaded by the applicant's arguments, and so I would suggest that the building inspector got it right.
Right?
I believe this solely belongs to the duly elected Board of Selectmen with the assistance of the town manager. This is not our purview. The Board of Selectmen set all the fees and costs and whatever it costs to run the town, and whatever they see, we elect the people, so our fate is in their hands. Give it to the Board of Selectmen and the town manager. End of story.
So what do we do with it, Alan? Like, what's our action for tonight?
Then we just dismiss it or vote it down? I mean, what's the appropriate thing?
So
Well, that's what it is.
So
That we deny the finding.
The petitioner's requested findings is as to the determination made by Mr. Brown as to the reasonableness of the plumbing permit fees and regulatory expenses pursuant to, so the notice, what's in the notice, you're moving in the affirmative to support the finding as
Off the
published.
building inspector.
Yeah, and then when I call them, it would require 4 votes to overturn the building inspector's decision that he's requested the finding on. That's the way I view the procedural aspect of the vote. So, if deliberations have been exhausted, I will hear a motion.
I can't see that.
You can't see that, huh?
Even I have glasses.
So I would say-
You're a new member now, aren't you now?
Yeah.
Break in
Does
on
Paul
that
have it?
one?
Does Paul have it? Sorry.
I have it,
Paul.
yes.
yeah.
I'm not exactly certain how to word it.
Well,
Do I?
historically, we move the petitions in the affirmative.
But the affirmative here would be all the negative to you, but the affirmative to the
To
building
support the
inspector.
finding, the vote would be to support the findings of the appeal.
Support the finding of the determination made by Mr. Brown and the reasonableness of the plumbing permit fees assessed by the building department. So, shall I start over and make a motion?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, I would make a motion on this matter to support the finding of the determination made by Mr. Brown and the reasonableness of the plumbing permit fees assessed by the building department to compensate the town of North Andover for its anticipated regulatory expense. I should continue. Pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 40, Section 22F, and Mass General Law, Chapter 143, Section 100. Now I'm less comfortable with that all of a sudden, because we're citing something that I'm not really making a motion on. I guess I'm just making a motion to
Well, I think that's correct. I mean, that's what was noticed. I think that's the correct motion.
Yeah, but our building inspector didn't say anything about Chapter 40 or Chapter 143.
This is
That's where I fumbled. So I just want to, what I want to do is make a motion to support the building inspector's determination of the plumbing permit fees. kind of period, end of story.
Well, but that's the notice, right? That's what we're being asked to make the decision on? General Laws, Chapter 40C, 22F, Mass General Laws, 143, Section 100. I think the finding has to be consistent with what's advertised, unless you want to take no action on something. But I can't see how that helps the situation. I think you just move it as noticed, and we just vote it up or down.
All right. Then I'll start over. Move it as noticed.
All right?
Once again, for those of you at home, bear with me. I make a motion to support the determination of the building inspector, Mr. Brown, and the reasonableness of the plumbing permit fees assessed by the building department to compensate the town of North Andover for its anticipated regulatory expense pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 40, Section 22F, and Mass General Law, Chapter 143, Section 100. We don't need the rest, do we?
No, I think that's what they're asking us to do, so I think that's fine. Is there a second?
I'll second the motion.
There's a second by Mr. Kusia, motion by Paul. So, all right, what we'll do is maybe I'll just call this individually.
Can we, before you begin, can we
Yes.
include in, for the record, can we include in this motion the vote that we are making a recommendation to take it to the Board of Selectmen? Or no?
No, that's his decision, not
Well,
ours.
Because I wouldn't want to guide the applicant on it.
Right, we don't want, that's his decision, not us.
You told me to go here, and I'm not going to.
We're on the same page.
But
Yeah, I mean, I tend to think that we are only acting within the narrow scope of what we're asked to do, you know, so that's sort of where we are. So we have a motion on the floor in a second, so I'll call the vote.
Yes.
You're
Yes supports the building inspector.
No.
Yes.
A no vote supports the building inspector.
No,
The way Paul read it, I thought a yes vote supports the building
The
inspector.
way I read it
Yes.
was a yes vote,
yes,
yes.
it's
That's
kind of like
what-
Survivor, the last vote. A yes.
Right.
That says a yes supports the finding of the building inspector. If you say no, I do not support the finding.
Okay, that's how, is that your recollection of how you read
Yeah,
that?
that's how I intended to read it, and how I think I read it.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, I did not elect to change my vote. My vote is still yes.
Yes. Ms. McIntyre?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes, Jerry got it right.
I am also a yes. So your findings are denied, and we will issue a decision within 14 days on file at the town clerk's office.
All right, thank you all.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, good luck.
Hope you're on heels.
Me too.
All right. Now,
We actually have a meeting schedule in here. But it's not on the agenda to approve it?
meeting calendar is under miscellaneous,
Oh, okay.
so we can
Miscellaneous,
We can get-
oh, meeting calendar, okay.
get
Maybe I
that.
should read these.
So where is that one? So does this take into account the town meeting dates? Okay, and,
That's why it has to be pushed to the senior center on the May date and the November date, because we were moving it up a week.
Okay.
Those two.
all right. So this is good, this is great, and we can get this posted down at the office of the clerk's office if you folks approve it. So this would be the meeting schedule for our regular meetings. This wouldn't take into account any special meetings that may need to have happen. And in terms of where they're meeting, so we're programmed for here for now during the town hall construction, but in the event that we had a larger group or more applicants, we would probably need to move to the senior center or a larger room in order to accommodate folks. So we'll just take it month by month and see what's open and who can accommodate. So I'll hear a motion to approve the meeting schedule.
I'll make a motion to approve the meeting schedule.
Motion by Mr. Kuchar, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, by Doug, all in favor?
Aye.
That's approved. All right, next would be on our agenda, has to do with the Osgood Committee memo, which I'm happy to get to. No good deed goes unpunished. Mr. Manzi here. So, just by way of history, you all received memorandums from Mr. Mailer in the town manager's office that the selectmen had been formed an Osgood committee, Osgood Landing Committee, and the Board of Appeals is one of the land use boards that's invited to have a seat on it. I had initially indicated at one point when it first came out that I'd be happy to participate in that, just sort of de facto as chairman. We did not, I know you had also indicated that something you might be interested in doing too.
I did.
Maybe Paul had at one point. So we did not, the two memos that came out, I think one was the intent to form, and then the second one that did form. We did not meet in December. Right, our meeting was canceled because we didn't have any public hearings scheduled for that meeting. So one of the things I had intended to do as your chairman, pursuant to our rules and regulations, Article 1, Section 2 or whatever, the day-to-day management of the chairman was to communicate back with the town in December in response to Mr. Mailer's communication. I did not really get that done until after the new year with the holidays and so forth. So I did send a memo, and I started to think about the committee a little bit, as over time. Sometimes I think about things too much. But what I was trying to do, I drafted a memo, I delivered it to Merrill on Monday morning before work so she could distribute it to Mr. Mailer and the board members so everybody would have an opportunity to see it. And I had thought of some questions that had come up with respect to that ad hoc committee that I had posed. I was trying to get some feedback in preparation for tonight's meeting because so much time had lapsed since November. And what I wanted to do was be able to have a discussion about the committee, and I had some concerns, and that I had just simply sort of as the gatekeeper, as chairman, in the way that I was interpreting what the committee was going to be. Typically, my experience has been that when you have these types of committees, and I just think it's just for discussion purposes, really, that when you talk about zoning, you're talking about districts, and you're talking about areas and, groups of properties. And one of the questions that I raised, you all had a copy of the memo, is that, this seemed to be more of a single parcel type situation because they're just looking at the Osgood facility, and they're talking about the Osgood facility. So, I was wondering with that, and, my understanding is there was also an appeal of the planning board decision, and I don't really know where that stands at this point, but and I was wondering if if the Board of Appeals, where we do hear a lot of interpretation zoning type things that come up, who referred to us as the court, if there was any potential liability if we were to have an official seat on that committee, where it appeared to me like they weren't looking at a group of properties or all the overlay districts or what have you. They were just kind of looking at that one site. I didn't know if it was really with the cooperation of the property owners or not with the cooperation. So I wanted to get some feedback and have something that I could, hopefully report back to you all with tonight so we could make a decision. Yeah, Al, you're overthinking it. It's no big deal. Everything's fine. Or, maybe those are some issues we should consider, and then the board can make the ultimate decision, who, if we're going to participate and how we would ultimately respond back to the selectmen's invitation to partake on the committee. It's already seemed structured, I sort of had it all set up in terms of they had the chair through the CD director and so forth. or whether we would simply would, participate by means of sending someone to observe and just report back, whether we should have a voting role as it's been set up. So, in efforts to try to do my due diligence, there were some communications that came back from Mr. Mailer yesterday, but I've been kind of busy at work. So I did make sure they all got to Merrill so she could distribute them. Mr. Mailer's comments were concerned that I was somewhat acting unilaterally and outside of the open meeting law in my role and authority as chairman, which I respectfully disagree with. I think that my role is probative, dealing with the day-to-day activities of the board. Our rules and regulations allow for it, and we report back to the board. So really somewhat of a benign intent to respond to a November memo that, in preparation of our meeting tonight, seems to have garnered a number of responses from Mr. Manager, and I think there's another one that he sent today through Merrill, and I know he's here, so, but, I think just, we just have to make a decision. If you folks are in favor of the memo that I sent, and if you support that, and then once you make that decision, we can figure out what initial steps you want to do in terms of participating or not participating in the committee. It was certainly not the reactions that I was expecting, but, just probative in nature, and we can figure out what the next steps are. And then after we get to that, and we figure out how you guys want to handle the committee, the Osgood Committee, and whether or not we should even be sitting on it, where we tend to be that appeal-type board. That, we've been hearing so many appeals of building inspectors and zoning decisions and different things, and whether we should even really be a voting member of whatever the policy setters are going to be doing. If the policy setters are looking at something and they're making strategic decisions, should our role not be as involved and just be a little bit more keeping with the appeals and what we typically do, knowing
But,
that
Al,
information's free-flowing. Those are my thoughts.
Can I ask you something? It's not anything that's going to be voted on. It's going to be voted by the town. Is it something that's going to be presented to the town to vote on?
Yeah.
So, reading this, it's an advisory board. I don't think there's any voting going on.
I don't know. That's why I was asking the questions.
And we actually have always asked to be included, so now that we are,
Well, in the past,
I would strongly recommend that a representative from this board attend
I think it could help
that.
avoid ultimately ending up having them come to the appeals.
Oh, no, they'll always come.
So am I being
With the Supreme Court.
Yes.
well, clearly, so,
Justice.
Like,
right,
feel the dreams, you have it, they'll come, yes.
right,
But I think our board absolutely needs to be represented,
sure.
because it does affect this board as well, as a whole. So I think it's important for a member of the ZBA to be there. Not knowing who it is.
Sure. So that's why I was asking for the opinion of town council, because I knew there was this appeal, and I didn't know what the intention was. So that was really the intent of my memo. Obviously, whatever you folks ultimately decide to do, we needed to get a response back to the manager and the selectmen, and we didn't meet in December, so, that's where we are today. To the extent you support the memo that I drafted as a response, fine. If you want us to send additional responses or an additional supplement, that's
I
fine.
don't have a copy of your.
Neither do I.
Nor do I.
Okay, good.
Well,
I didn't lose it.
Did it get-
I got it.
I was looking for it, I couldn't find it.
I'm sorry, what?
I emailed it to
Just
everybody.
email.
Merrill says it was emailed to
But
everybody.
I did not, actually, when you emailed it to me again, it was not in there. It was only,
Oh, I just got the intro. Don't read it.
yeah, I got
Tom's
town.
Well, we can circulate, so I have a copy of it. But you did send it
Yeah,
out
that's
to
it.
everyone, right? Through the email? Twice? Okay. So maybe for the meetings, we can just have the printed packages so everybody has the printed forms when we come to the meeting. So basically, my intent was saying, look, I'd like to get an opinion. I'm not going to take any action on the committee procedurally, not with respect to the substance, but, because I wanted to have a little gatekeeping for us as it related to coming into this meeting and seeing, what the feedback was going to be.
Mr. Chairman, would you give me the courtesy of a public comment?
I'm sorry?
Will you give me the courtesy of a couple of comments?
Oh, yeah, let's just have the board deliberate, and then,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Well, I think it would be helpful to the deliberation. It's really upper level stuff, but I think helpful to the deliberation before we make any final decisions.
Sure, come on.
Appreciate it. Thank you. So, I agree with Ms. McIntyre. The intent of the committee really was to put, as I referenced several times today, a member of the Supreme Court on a group that seemed to be the most appropriate group, to have an upper-level conversation about a significant part of. This isn't about a building or a parcel. It's about an overlay district passed in 2007 that passed both state muster, 40R, and everything that went with it. It's substantial. It's not, it can't be treated or made analogous to a single home or a single, it's not that way. It makes sense because it is significant. And by the way, the town is going to begin a master planning process, one that's been sorely needed for a long time. Our master plan was last updated in a comprehensive sense in 2000. But there are certain aspects of that planning process which we need to start to think about, because if you incorporate some of them, if you try to do a master plan from soup to nuts, bringing us from 2000 to 2017, it's going to take us so long to complete it because it's so large. So this was sort of one-off to that to a certain extent, and I would expect it would end up being, these are a committee that will advise us ultimately the process that moves forward. So having the land use boards present only makes sense. You deal with the issues that relate to our properties. Having conservation, having planning, and having zoning, to me, made the most sense. It's intended to be exactly that, an advisory group, not intended to be anything more than that. A member of the Board of Selectmen will participate, it's someone with zoning experience, actually. There'll be a debate whether or not there really needs to be a resident, or whether or not it'll just be contained with those 5 members, or whether it's simply a representative of each of the land use bodies, the Board of Selectmen, and the CD director. It really is intended to make some recommendations. In the end, there's a process that exists about changing zoning. This doesn't supersede that. That's statutorily driven. So if recommended from this is 15, 18 items, or 0, ultimately it still has to go through the process identified by statute for any amendment to happen.
So who is the, if I may ask, because I think this is great, I'd love to have a dialogue, just a general dialogue about this, because this is the way we have to do it. Who is the advisory, who is this group advising? The land use boards, the selectmen?
I would see them as making a recommendation, a broad recommendation back. I'm not sure it's specific to a group. I would think they would make a report back to the Board of Selectmen, and ultimately that'd be provided back to each of the land use boards.
As it relates to zoning?
As it relates to zoning. Ultimately, there needs to be a hearing process. That's required with any zoning change, if there are any recommended changes. It's just logical you would do that. This bylaw was passed in 2007. There hasn't been any modification since 2007. To not have some kind of review doesn't seem to make sense.
Well, interestingly enough about the bylaw,
Sure.
there are 2 members of us in this room that actually voted against it at town meeting.
Right.
Ms. McIntyre and I were both present, and we did that because of the breadth of the bylaw and the manner. And I think town meeting in those days was unanimously declared, but we were up in the galley.
Sure.
And because there were,
there's 3 of us in the whole
well, there might
auditorium.
have been 3.
Alice, Mr. Manzi has previously identified 3 people, so I'm trying to find the mystery person that isn't at the table.
His father.
Maybe my father. Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yes.
But,
Conservation has already voted a member to the committee, so perfect.
but what I recall about that period of time, and just for discussion purposes, is when the 40R process was coming forward. It was sort of one of these things where I think it was driven by the owner. It seemed to be driven sort of in a partnership by the owner and the town. And what I recall the selling points of it being is there was an incentive to the town because there was a stipend fee for adopting this 40R and the streamlined permitting in the day.
Sure.
And everybody, in the maybe $500,000, $1 million the town was getting by adopting it, and everybody was
Drank the Kool-Aid.
Drank the Kool-Aid. That was the benefit of the bargain. That was the benefit of the bargain, and the owners seemed to want it as well. And as I started to reflect on this process, like the concerns that I had, given the gravity of all of the hearings in recent months, and sort of I wasn't able to really get a fair understanding of if this review is simply, town-driven, if it's in partnership with the owners, and if it could be viewed, and really the genesis of my memo was if it can be viewed as some form of spot zoning, where you're only looking at one parcel, because it wasn't clear if they were participating in
Can I
that.
correct you, because you've said it in your email, you've said it in your memo, and you've said it twice tonight.
What email did I...
It's not one parcel. It's an overlay district. It's an overlay district adopted by the town.
It's
that
commonly
actually-
owned by one group,
But
right?
that's a separate question. I want to avoid calling this one parcel. This isn't one parcel. It's not Osgood Landing. It is an entire district. It's a section. It's probably, arguably, the most substantial section of our zoning bylaw.
Yeah, we had a big hearing about it.
So I want to be clear about the review. The review is about the overlay district, what we refer to, I don't know who came up with this name, this drives me, the Osgood, right?
Right.
In and of itself, everybody struggles with that. This is a discussion about Osgood, not about Osgood Landing, not about 1,600 Osgood Landing. There is a substantial difference. There's 170 acres on the parcel. Again, there would be many who looked at this from the outside that would argue it may be the most substantial piece of sort of niche zoning we have in our entire bylaw.
It's in common ownership, though, right?
I'm not talking about the ownership. I'm just simply saying the town adopted a substantial document, sans 3 votes, 2 of which are in this room, which constitutes...
But now we have it.
I understand. I'm not debating that. It's just,
Yeah.
this was a substantial discussion at the time. I was not present. I'm not going back and debating the merits for or against. Some
Yeah.
believe it was a response to a affordable housing project. Some believe it was a I was not there, and I benefit from not being there. I'm just reflecting
Sure.
on the fact that after a substantial period of time, what was assumed would happen hasn't yet happened. And I think it is logical, since the town has invested substantial assets, and I know you've been present at those, or substantial time,
Yeah, we
of
went
bringing
on a
state
great tour.
officials and others to the site, that it's logical that the public, because these will be public meetings, publicly posted, with minutes, the owner invited to every meeting, it would be logical to have a conversation about probably the most substantial parcels of land that we
Are they on the
have in the
committee? Is the
community.
owner on the committee?
The owner is not on the committee. This is a committee of the land use boards that will invite many stakeholders to the table. It's not an adversarial conversation. It's a public process, not unlike a visioning session, where we ask for various stakeholders to come in and provide their thoughts. How can we do whatever we can do to make this parcel or the parcels of land in the Osgood district, maybe reflect on it. The idea is, listen, the Osgood, other than maybe changing the name, is ideal. It's exactly what we contemplated it would be. Maybe through the procedures that have happened in front of the zoning board and the planning board, for instance, this whole question that came before the ZBA, overlay, underlying, alternative, and that whole discussion.
Yeah.
Do we just leave it there for the next conversation? Or is there an opportunity to reflect and see whether or not the language, even if it's just clarifying the existing language so that we don't get into that kind of confusion, should be tightened up? I don't know. That's why I'm not on the committee, because I don't have a land use background. But my only recommendation is change it from Osgood. So from my perspective, the land use experts, remember the Supreme Court on the planning side and the conservation side, along with a member of the Board of Selectmen, get in the room with the CD director and have a series of public meetings inviting the owner and other stakeholders, and look at the bylaw and come back with what could be recommendations. Those recommendations would be made public, and then the process would be determined whether or not the planning board, as an example, decides, listen, this is worth moving forward with a change in zoning or not, or other bodies decide to do that. I don't want to define the outcome. I think it's intended to be generally unscripted. My specific questions, so we can get to that, about the correspondence is, regardless of rules and regulation, when the town's letterhead of a specific board is used, and a body, a multiple member body, is included in the from line, state statute and the interpretation of the open meeting law says you can't say zoning board of appeals, even after it if you say the chair, without indicating that there's been a deliberation about the contents of that memo. And the memo was not just sent to myself and town council, it was sent to the entire Board of Selectmen, the entire Conservation Commission, the entire Planning Board, as well as this body. And the process, not unlike the process to develop the committee, I sent a letter, a memo to each of you, and a memo to each of the bodies involved. You were CC'd on a letter that went to the Board of Selectmen. That was discussed in an open meeting, voted by the Board of Selectmen, and then you received the follow-up about the establishment of the committee. That is an expectation up under the open meeting law. Having individual, not that I don't respect your perspective on it, but it is our expectation that those kind of things are deliberated here first. You agree to a memo, and then you send it.
Well,
from my point of view, this is fairly simple. I'd love to have you participate. I think what I took from individual conversations with Mr. Manzi, who I respect and on occasion share a cup of coffee with, was
absolutely.
They were one of the 3 votes, right? And if you were one of the 3 votes that were in favor, this is the perfect opportunity, in my opinion, to be part of the team that decides whether or not this is the
So my
product.
only concern, not my only concern, but I guess just to get back to the thrust was, I was considering in my mind as I reflected on what had come in, and, trying to prepare for this meeting, knowing we didn't meet in December, wanting to get back to you. I mean, I think it's a semantic issue in the context of whether it says Mr. Manzi, Chairman, CBA, or however the wording is, but I understand, I respect your point of view. I was looking at it in terms of a resident, someone who's lived here for a lot of years, and I was thinking, well, what if they wanted to convene a committee and discuss my property, and how would I feel about that? And I started looking up. That's why I wanted some clarification. I know you don't like the term spot zoning, but that was what it felt like to me. That's why I wanted to get an advisory opinion on it from council, because I wanted to really understand. I understand there's a public hearing process, but I didn't see, it representing all the overlay districts in town.
I'm confused by the analogy, Mr. Chairman, that you'd use one property, yours, in the middle of an entire residential R1 district and compare it to a series of parcels that have already been defined as its own zone.
It's a single, right, exactly.
So
it's a single purpose.
So here's a simple way to look at it from my perspective. If the Osgood 40R, approved by the Attorney General, the state, and others, is not spot zoning, how can a conversation about that be spot zoning?
Well, that's what I'm not clear about, because my recollection in those years, and I know you didn't have the benefit of being here.
Not benefit. I think I had the benefit of not being here.
Right. But my recollection is that was something that was sort of a genesis between the town and the owners. Like, that's what they were doing back then. So, and I just was really looking for some clarification as to if that's the same situation today. And, I'm just trying to do my due diligence, trying to do a good job for everybody. I understand we disagree, and, reasonable people disagree all the time because we all have different roles. I'm trying to do some gatekeeping for my board. I try to do for all of us and try to do a good job for everyone. That's always my intention.
Yep.
And that's why I was looking for a little clarification as to whether or not, given the totality of the circumstances and all the appeals, that there was any potential liability if we participated, that's all.
Well, our position is that we'd like to have you join. We don't think it's as complicated as you've made it. We don't think, I get concerned when members of a board or an individual reference something which could be interpreted as inciting legal action, and spot zoning is...
Can't help it, I'm a lawyer, I'm sorry.
I understand that. Maybe that's the issue. I'm a former accountant, so I come from a different perspective.
I apologize for that.
So it's not an apology necessary. So from our perspective, this is pretty straightforward. It's a conversation. I think multiple member bodies and review committees exist throughout the town and do on a regular basis. We take up topics that seem to be hot topics or important topics. This isn't particularly complicated. There is nothing about the committee itself which has an empowering capacity to change any aspect of the zoning. It's a conversation. It seems to make sense that the zoning board be included. From my perspective, it made sense because you're relevant to the conversation.
Yeah, initially, and I got to be honest with you, when I initially, saw that, I thought, geez, when for reading in November, this is great, it's all inclusive. And it was sort of as I started to reflect upon things and,
Sure.
Think about all the possible scenarios in terms of how these things shake out, I sort of, let my...
I just have a quick question.
Sure.
On the original one, the zoning board was included, which was me. and then I was asked not to come back. So, or I was left off meetings, or I don't know what happened. So would this happen in this case? Are we permanent members of this advisory?
I don't think it's a we, I think it's a you. I move to not nominate Ellen.
I should be the backup.
I would see this as a process where whoever began finished the process as well. But again, I'm not actively participating. So.
Yeah, I mean, we may want to set up a tiered system. We'd have a primary and an alternate if the board decides that they want to
Yeah.
participate in it. It's ultimately the board's decision whether they want to participate or not, and we can have that general discussion, after we get through the merits of what we're doing, but
So
you
I'd
may have an
encourage you to
alternate in those
participate.
days.
I'm not, quite frankly, I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time going back and forth with council as to, and that's not a disrespectful comment. If the board feels that that's been raised to a level that it creates confusion in your mind and you don't feel you should participate, that's fine. That's a choice. The invite exists. It was done out of respect for the board, and hopefully you'll recognize the respect of inclusion, in this case in transparency, and embrace that and put a member on. If you feel like the question is confused by, if Mr. Manzi's correct, or you feel like there's further questions, we're just ready to move forward, and we don't think we want to spend a whole bunch of time debating whether or not the committee should agree.
And in my memo, quite candidly, and the questions that I raised with respect for the process and the manner in which the policy setters, have to set policy and go forward. And we recognize it as an invitation. At least I recognize it as an invitation. I welcome it as an invitation. I just felt the need to do my due diligence for my board. I tend to be kind of an active guy, an active chairman. And I try to do my best, although I was a little late getting back to you with the holiday season. So naturally, whatever the board decides to do, they decide to do. So.
I guess what I would say, just to kind of be another country hurtful and move this along a little bit, Mr. Chair, is that I absolutely welcome the invitation. I can't imagine that there is a better idea on the planet than to take a look at the Osgood, for heaven's sake. That is something that appears to have just floundered for any number of years for any number of reasons, and it's absolutely worth exploring each and every one of those nooks and crannies by any and every person who's interested in it, for heaven's sakes, because there can't be anything more land use important to the town of North Andover, arguably to the region of the Merrimack Valley, than those parcels of land, the Osgood district. That being said, Mr. Chair, you are my chairman. I vote for you every year. I appreciate all of the work that you do to be the gatekeeper, to do all the scurrying behind the scenes in order to make the trains run on time. And to the extent that you have questions, I respect that you want those questions asked for the benefit of the remainder of the board. If the medium's not perfect, I appreciate that perhaps there are lessons learned. I don't always agree with the questions that you ask. You come from a very conservative, risk-averse place. I totally 100% get it and respect that place that you're coming from. In this case, I can't even kind of imagine a scenario in which spot zoning could be, in the same zip code as a review by a group of land use boards of the Osgood. So again, all that being said, I can't imagine a better place for one of us to be than to be on this committee at its meetings, and I appreciate the work that you do to ask important questions, to prepare the board to make the important decisions that it has before it.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that.
So your memo is still on our agenda, is it not? Or-
Well, I mean, I think procedurally what you would need to, what I'd ask you to do is approve the form of the memo, and, because it was sent as it relates to this public record. And then, if the board elects to do something different, and you want to put somebody on the committee tonight, or you want to wait until after to see if there's any additional action taken on the memo, that's fine. But I think I would ask that you approve it because it was sent as part of our record, and then decide what additional action, if any, you want to take after that.
Now, this is what you're referring to, the January 7th memo? Is this what?
It was dated January 7th. I delivered it to the zoning office on Monday, the 11th.
And because it's on zoning board and all that, this makes it an
So I
additional subject on our agenda. We have to-
I think to clear the record and the context that's raised, I think it's a semantics with respect to whether it's from me, Esquire Chairman, ZBA, or ZBA, Mr. Manzi Chairman. I think it's a semantic argument, but I'd like to have it clarified for the record, and then we can move on to the next component of this, whether you want to go on and who you want to not go on, or whether you want to wait for a response or not. But that would be appropriate if we get that resolved, and then we can move on to board elections after that, and then be done for tonight.
What do you want me to do with this?
I think if you move to approve it in its form, as sent, and that would make sense to clean up our record.
Okay, I'll make a motion to approve it in whatever you said.
I second it.
Okay, so there's a motion to approve it as to form,
Correct.
and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor of the memo?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. All right, so that's deemed approved as to the record. What additional action, if any, would you like to take with respect to the Osgood Committee now that Mr. Mailer is...
Osgood.
Yeah, Osgood. Osgood. Mr. Mailer's here tonight. Do you want to...
To make a motion to change the name?
Do you want to, would you like to
If only we
wait?
had that power.
Would you like to see, are you interested in any additional information from the memo, or do you want to move on to a different part of the process? as it relates to-
I don't think any further explanation is needed. I think that-
Satisfied with Mr.
yes,
Mailer's response
in my
at
opinion,
this
so
hearing?
I'm satisfied with his response. I don't think any further clarification, explanation. I think we should move forward with
Fine.
electing a person to go on to the committee.
Sure. I would suggest that you might want to have a primary and an alternate, you know,
I would have...
in the event that, you know, somebody's sick or they can't go. If it's going to be a process with which Mr. Mailer is discussing, then you can at least, you know, you can try to have someone going. So it would make sense, I think, for the primary to be a regular board person, and maybe, you know,
If it helps, given the fact that the chairs have a tendency to be the busiest, the other boards have chosen, with no disrespect to Mr.
Right.
Manzi, the non-chairs, because they're busy typically with the in-between time. So they consciously chose someone who was not the chair.
sure. I mean, I think that's helpful.
It takes a little off your plate.
It doesn't add.
Has
Doesn't
the-
add to a busy plate.
Has the meeting times been identified yet?
No, I'm going to, when this is all, when we're at that sort of point, I'm going to turn it over to Eric Ofori and let him manage times, dates, people's schedules. I think we'll try to, clearly, some of them will need to be in the evening because you want to encourage the public to attend. We're trying to make this transparent, but I then step back and let others deal with that from this point.
I mean, I'd be interested in doing it. I mean, I don't know if I'm going to come in with rose-colored, you know, tainted, but to provide a background, but actually some of the other members, Rich was in there as well, so he does have a background of the
Right.
process as well.
It's something I'd also be interested, I don't know if a new set of eyes on it helps or changes the perspective of it. I don't know.
I'm having trouble with the woman who got thrown off at it saying, I want to be there again. I don't agree with
I
anything about the
was in
outcome.
good company. I was with
She
Mark
would do an
Bobrowski.
excellent job for us.
Mark Bobrowski and myself were
Excellent
thrown
job.
off. Just FYI. The guy
Her
who wrote the
qualifications, indisputable.
Well,
Indisputable.
the great thing about this type of
Qualifications and
situation is it's going to be an
different
open
We're talking
process. Anybody can
qualifications,
go.
not temperament.
Correct, and anyone can go as a meeting. It's an open meeting as well.
I mean, I think it makes sense that if we're gonna send people to a committee, that you might respectfully want to send the regular members, you know, in terms of an alternating, because they have the longevity. But I would encourage you to go in and to participate if, you know, anybody that's not a regular, that's the associate, because, you know, on any given day, you are sitting in the seat making those hard decisions, and, you know, God knows how long any one of us will continue with this
He's on
job
your
anyway,
strike.
so.
You just said it politely.
Do I need to carry your bag up?
But I mean, I think it would make sense to, you know, to elect, you know, the vice chair.
I make a motion that we send,
Hold on a second. When does your term expire?
Not telling. In a year.
Oh, really?
And a half.
It's not June?
No.
All right. Doug, you interested?
I make a motion that we
I'm not interested.
nominate
Are you?
Mrs.
No.
Are you
Ellen
interested?
Are
McIntyre
you interested?
to be our
Nobody else wanted to do
representative
it.
at this particular board, would be the Osgood or Osgood.
Only if it's Osgood.
To be our-
Okay.
to be
Of
our-
the old board.
To be our primary representative, and most
be our
people send
primary.
one or two.
Most said one, but I think your suggestion is a good.
And I think our alternate should be Miss Alexandra A. Jacobs.
I'd absolutely throw my vote behind behind Ellen,
Oh, gosh.
as long as she makes a promise on the record that she'll behave herself.
I will behave myself to the fullest extent of my capability.
All right, so
We need a second.
I'll second that.
Second, really?
do you have any interest in going, Paul?
Not if other people want, if nobody wanted to go, I would go. But to the extent that the board's already got this thing populated, then I'm happy to say, good.
Good riddance to you.
All right, so motion, is there a second by Ted?
Yes.
Okay, all in favor of the designees?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. I will
We'll represent you guys.
I will declare that to be approved.
Appreciate it.
Would I also have the authority to send another memorandum to the town manager's office saying who the delegates are?
Of course.
Yes.
What do you need the motion?
Or is it inherent within
Motion
Article
for that.
1, Section 2? Is it in the duties of chairman?
It's in the minutes.
It's in the minutes.
Very good. All right, so that takes care of that. So I want to thank you for coming to our meeting.
My pleasure to attend. Should do
Because
more.
Yeah, sure.
I think it's been very enlightening. And,
I've learned quite a bit.
That makes one of us.
And there was another matter on our agenda, maybe you could help. The Housing Partnership Committee we
Yes.
touched on earlier. We're trying to find out if that's still a committee or not, because Ms. McIntyre is also on that committee.
Was.
As is,
They're probably in a meeting, but they just forgot to invite me.
I'm not aware that the Housing Partnership, I've been here for 4 years, I'm not sure the Housing Partnership Committee has been active during that time period.
Regardless, then if it is not, then it needs to be,
It's on the agenda.
Yeah, I don't know why it's on your agenda. I mean, when was the last time you got a report?
well, we were looking, I hate to be technical, we were looking for an official communication from someone by our next meeting, just telling us if they've disbanded, if they are not disbanded,
We're
because
not
she was the
sure.
delegate. They want to take them off the
More
agenda.
than happy to take that charge, try to chase down exactly what's going on and provide you correspondence. I'm not sure that there would have been any kind of formal disbanding of the group, but it may have just, sometimes these things peter out a little bit, and I
Yeah.
can certainly communicate when the last time we were
We do
away.
try to keep good records, so.
I noticed it on the agenda, and I was a little confused, so...
there's money still associated with that
Right. Well, I'll try to
partnership, so.
chase that down to a certain extent.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you.
Okay.
So then the last matter of business is, we do every January.
Thank you
is-
for,
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
You're welcome to stay on.
actually Dick is too, I just got an email.
All right, so, is our board elections. We organize every January for people that are interested in the jobs of vice chairman, chairman, and clerk. Regrettably, it's only open to the regular members. I hate to say that because, but that's why we try to keep it all inclusive. So, we do have a clerk vacancy. We do have technically vacancies for all, so that's where we are tonight. Anybody interested in?
I'll make a motion to have it as Al as the chair, me as vice, and Paul as clerk.
I'm blushing.
You're working your way up. Soon to be in the big seats.
I second that motion.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Is there anybody that, like...
Is anyone who wants to
desperately-
jump up into any
Desperately
of those
wants their
seats?
jobs? Desperately?
No.
Feels like they
Sounds good.
want to do it?
I think the three nominees couldn't have been better nominees.
Well, I got to tell you, after the past couple of days, I'm really rethinking it. But,
I've said it to you offline now. I don't know why you want to do what you do.
I don't know either.
I've done it and it's horrible.
Jeez.
Just-
Well, I'll do it so long as the board is comfortable with it, and so long as the board has faith in what I'm doing. I think Ellen does a wonderful job. Paul, I think you'd make a welcome addition as clerk. So if there's a motion and a second on the floor, I guess, unless there's any further discussion.
No.
No?
No?
All right, all in favor of that for this term?
Aye.
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 Okay, we'll declare that to be approved as well.
Do you want to send a memorandum to Mr.
I'm going to be sending a lot of memorandums to Mr. Mailer now that I know how much he enjoys them. And,
I'll change my email address.
yeah. Just point of order, technically, I didn't send the memo to you. It came from the office. It came from the zoning office. I just delivered the memo.
Question memos which haven't been discussed anyway.
Okay.
Moving on.
Brilliant.
We've moved on. All right. So, hey, lo and behold, we're at number 6 for adjournment.
I'll make a motion. Can I make the motion?
I'll second that.
Please.
Please, all in favor?
Aye.
We stand adjourned.